Ladies and gentlemen, after a great Dynamite this past night, we have ourselves a lot of things that happened. We got ourselves an MMA fight. We had the debut of a legend's son this past week. We also saw some great action in ring, along with some big matches that are made for the future. So without further ado, I am Kevin Jones, the Disciples of Wrestling, and it's time for me to break down everything that happened. So let's hop into it. So we start off this with the MMA fight between Wardlow and Jake Hager. Both of these come out with, of course, a member of their respective factions, where Wardlow comes out with Shawn Spears and Jake Hager comes out with Chris Jericho. We find out before this thing starts that it'll be 3 5-minute rounds, and of course we get this thing started off. Jake Hager is starting off pretty nice, where he's using his length and gets some significant shots in that wake up Wardlow. And Wardlow gets 2 takedowns in, a Superman punch, and we see a slugfest going into the end of the first round. And it's looking good for Wardlow as we start the second round. And we see Wardlow look to pick up where he left off, looking to get some takedowns in, even power bombing Jake Hager into the steel structure. But eventually we see that Wardlow starts to get tired as he's not used to this structured fight. And of course, we end up seeing Jake Hager lock in twice on 2 occasions. Of course, the nice finisher that he has of the arm and head triangle choke with, of course, his biceps. Now, of course, the first one we see Wardlow get it out of, but the second one we actually see Wardlow start to faint away, and of course, Jake Hager gets the victory. Now, at the end of the fight, we see Jake Hager look to pay respect to Wardlow with a nice little handshake. But before we even see Wardlow make up his mind, we see Shawn Spears comes in to attack him, where we end up seeing Chris Jericho coming in to help out Wardlow himself. We see MJF rush from the back and end up bringing the numbers games to Chris Jericho and Jake Hager. Now, this ends up bringing out Dean Malenko as he takes MJF off of his good friend Chris Jericho. But MJF ends up retaliating by punching him and knocking down Mr. Dean Malenko, the 60-year-old man. Now, eventually, the officials come out to bring, of course, the Pinnacle from out of the MMA octagon. But we see Sammy Guevara come out as he's furious of what happened, and he's looking to go after those 3. But the officials end up holding Sammy Guevara back. But we find out that in 2 weeks, on June 30th, we will be seeing MJF versus Sammy Guevara. The next thing we go backstage with Team Taz. And Taz flat out lets Ricky Starks know that him and Brian Cage need to hurry up and get on the same page. As of course, they are still looking at repercussions from last week when Starks slapped Cage in the face. Now, of course, Hobbs ends up interjecting and letting them know that he's, of course, frustrated at what happened as he was left solo in the match and the loss. And Taz is listening, so he issues the challenge to Hangman Page that next week we get Powerhouse Hobbs versus Hangman Adam Page in a one-on-one match. Now, we find out later on, as, of course, Hangman Adam Page is celebrating with the Dark Order, the Hangman ends up accepting this challenge. Now, when Alex Marvez looks to ask Hangman Page about, of course, the championship match between Jungle Boy and Kenny Omega, of course, he ends up ignoring the question and goes back to celebrating. But, of course, we all know that this is looming. We are looking to see this match between Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega. But, you know, that's just my predictions of who's going to win. I think Kenny is going to win this match next week. But who am I, you know? I only do this in my spare time. Now, our second match of the night, we end up getting the handicap match. And it is Darby Allin taking on the Men of the Year, Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page. Now, of course, Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky end up taking control of most of this match. But Darby Allin does a good job of staying in it, using very creative reversals and creative offense to keep himself in the match. Even seeing at one point where Darby Allin ends up zip tying All Ego Ethan Page's legs together to where he can hit the coffin drop onto Scorpio Sky, where this ended up being a near fall where Ethan Page pulled Darby Allin out of the ring. Now, of course, later on, we ended up seeing the numbers game come into full effect where Darby Allin was hit by the Ego's Edge for Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky to get the win. Now on to our third match. It is Cesaro Bononi versus Orange Cassidy. And we start this thing off where Cesaro Bononi is dominating. He's really handing it to Orange Cassidy. Like this big guy against this small little boy. He really handed it to Orange Cassidy. But OC ends up getting back into this using his speed. And we end up seeing at one point where the best friends come in and even give the assist to Orange Cassidy to take out all of the wingmen on the outside. We see Orange Cassidy come back in and hit the Stun Dog Millionaire. Then he hits, of course, an Orange Punch on all the members of the wingmen, including Cesaro Bononi, for the finish and the win. Next up, we see ourselves backstage, the interview of Alex Marvez with Jungle Boy Jack Perry. And of course, they're looking to talk about Jack Perry's huge championship match against Omega next week on Saturday's Dynamite. But of course, before Jack Perry can even go in depth of what he thinks about the match, we see the interruption of course, Kenny Omega and the Invisible Hand, Don Callis. And it's looking like Kenny Omega is egging on Mr. Jungle Boy, looking to get a street fight going on that night. And it's looking like, of course, while Kenny is egging it on, we end up seeing his little assistant end up hitting Jungle Boy in the back with the laptop, and these two start brawling. But when Jungle Boy looks to take things and spin them around into his favor, we see Kenny Omega running off with Don Callis in a golf cart. Now we go back to the ring, and it is the QT Marshall and Aaron Solo tag team match against Cody Rhodes and the debuting Brock Anderson, the son of Arn Anderson. And we start this match off with Brock Anderson and Aaron Solo starting off, and Brock Anderson's looking good. Even to the point where Aaron Solo ends up tagging in QT Marshall, and we end up seeing Cody Rhodes get tagged in. And of course, QT wants to retreat, so he did tag in Aaron Solo, and we see Cody Rhodes get zeroed out until, of course, he's able to fight off Aaron Solo and QT to tag in Mr. Brock Anderson. And Anderson gets in there, and he runs wild, looking like his dad. It was looking good for him. But of course, we end up seeing this thing coming to a halt when we go into commercial break, where QT Marshall ends up hitting the double-A spine buster, staring straight at Arn as he does it. And now we come back from break, and we end up seeing that QT Marshall and Aaron Solo have gotten things back into their favor, zeroing out Brock Anderson and taking all control of the match. All up until QT looks to hit the crossroads, where Brock Anderson reverses it into a DDT and hot tagged in Cody Rhodes. And Cody Rhodes runs wild as he looks to bring the momentum back to his tag team. And of course, things end up breaking down as Brock Anderson is now legal. Cody goes after QT Marshall on the outside on the entranceway. And it looks like Brock Anderson is able to get the overhook pin, where he ends up taking the win for his tag team and pinning Aaron Solo. And after the match, we end up seeing a great moment where Arn Anderson and his son Brock celebrate in the ring, while Cody looks in, of course, awe and at the entranceway. And now we go backstage again, where we get the sit-down interview with, of course, JR talking to Andrade. And of course, JR's asking what made Andrade come to AEW. And he flat out said, AEW has stars, and I'm here to prove that I am a superstar. And of course, when he's questioned about it, he flat out says that his next step in his career, he's looking to take the opportunity to go after the TNT and the AEW championships. And of course, when he's questioned about his allegiance with Vicky Guerrero, he talks about her knowledge of the business and, of course, the heritage as it runs deep with her association with Eddie Guerrero and Andrade's family down in Mexico. Now, of course, he ends up informing everybody that coming up soon, there will be a surprise from Vicky and Andrade coming in the near future. And now we go back to the ring, and it is the match of Penelope Ford versus Julia Hart, as she's accompanied by the Varsity Blondes. Now we start this thing off, and of course Penelope Ford is having almost a perfect match, as she of course is using her experience to outshadow Miss Julia Hart. And of course, she's owning the match, even to a point where she ends up making a small hiccup where she misses her finisher, which is the moonsault off of the top rope. But we see her quickly start to readjust as she locks in the Death Valley hook for the win and the tap out victory over Miss Julia Hart. Now, after the match, we end up seeing Miro come in, and Miro he's saying he's going to be the protector for Penelope for while Kip is gone. And of course, if you guys know the history, Miro is the reason why Kip is injured. So of course, he ends up coming in and taking out the Varsity Blondes, where it ends up being set up for in 2 weeks, we will be seeing Brian Pillman Jr. versus Miro for the TNT Championship. Next up, we go backstage and it is an interview with Tony Schiavone with Dr. DMD, Miss Britt Baker. And of course, she's accompanied by her right hand, Miss Rebel, aka Reba. And while she's about to talk about Nyla Rose and her not getting a title shot, of course, Vicky Guerrero comes up, the manager of Nyla Rose, and she's like, hey, me and Nyla want this title fight. And she's like, girl, you ain't getting it. Of course, you looking to come to me to hand the title over to Nyla. And Vicky, of course, talks about her bringing in the huge acquisition of Andrade and Tony Khan owing her one for this acquisition. And she lets her know that in 2 weeks' time, we will be getting the tag team match of Rebel and Britt Baker versus Nyla Rose and, by surprise, Vicky Guerrero. Yes, Vicky Guerrero will be stamping into the ring for a tag team bout against Britt Baker and Rebel, accompanied by her, of course, her assistant, the person she manages. I lost train of thought with of course, the description of her. But Miss Nyla Rose will be tagging with Vicky Guerrero in 2 weeks. Now it is time for our main event, and it is a trios match, as it is Matt Jackson of the Young Bucks and the Good Brothers representing the Elite versus Pentagon. We have, of course, on his team, Mr. Eddie Kingston, and as the other person, the Elite Killer, Mr. Frankie Kazarian. And we start this thing off in his great tag team work from both teams. We end up seeing things break down very early, as of course we end up seeing the Elite zero out Kazarian. But of course this brings in the hot tag of Pentagon, and he takes out everybody of the Elite, even bringing in some great tag team coherency for him, Kazarian, and Eddie Kingston. Now this thing ends up breaking down again, where the Elite end up outnumbering Penta and end up back in control of the match. Now, as this thing breaks down, which was a common thing for this match, it was very entertaining, but this thing was out of control numerous times. We see this thing break down once again, but we end up seeing the two legal guys, Carl Anderson and Pentagon El Zero Miedo. And we see these two go at it, where Penta is looking to finish up the match. He's on the top rope looking to hit his finish. But we end up seeing Nick Jackson rushing in from the back to spray Penta with this can of spray. I don't know if it's tan spray, cool down spray, or whatever. It's right in the face of Penta. And we end up seeing this being enough for Carl Anderson to go to the top for a super cutter for the win for the Elite. Now, there was a lot of moving pieces on this episode of Dynamite. We actually see a lot of matches being made, where some great matches are scheduled for next week on the nice special Saturday night edition of Dynamite. And then, of course, for when AEW returns back to Wednesday nights on June 30th for, of course, their show as well. Now, of course, go ahead, like, subscribe, share, let everybody know. And I'll be back with you guys, of course, with some more videos. And we'll be bringing you guys the first of many with these MMA Eliminators Tournament videos. But until next time, I'm Kevin Jones, the Disciples of Wrestling, and that was wrestling.